turn to Genesis chapter 13. Genesis chapter 13, we're going to be looking at a few different scriptures, a number in the Old Testament, and then we're going to look at some teachings of Christ in the New Testament. And we're going to be looking at separation as it comes to family matters. So husbands and wife will tell you how to separate. Over the years, there's been a lot of people have asked me different things when it comes to family, because sometimes it can be difficult, but I think we can look at some scripture, get some ideas when it comes to family. I read about two guys that met at church. One guy was complaining about his family problems, and the new guy said, "Oh, you think you have family problems? Listen to my situation." He said, "A few years ago, I met a young widow, and she had a grown-up daughter, and we got married, and I got myself a stepdaughter. My father, who became a widower, married my stepdaughter. That made my stepdaughter my stepmother. So my father became my stepson. Also, my wife became mother-in-law of her father-in-law. Much later, the daughter of my wife, my stepmother, had a son. So this boy was my half-brother because he was my father's son, but he was also the son of my wife's daughter, which made him my wife's grandson. That made me the grandfather of my half-brother. So this was nothing until my wife and I had a baby. So now the half-sister of my son, my stepmother, is also the grandmother. This makes my father the brother-in-law of my child, whose stepsister is my father's wife. I am my stepmother's brother-in-law. My wife is her own child's aunt, and my son is my father's nephew, and I am my own grandfather." And then he looked and he says, "And you think you have family problems?" So anyways, thought I'd share that with you. That'd probably help clear things up in your family too. Except it gets worse if you live in LaPorte. Sorry, Andy and Tisa. All right, but anyways, so there are examples I think that I could give. I'm going to use a couple of them here, and none of these. I'm glad that these are not. I pulled these off of examples from books. That way you'd say, "Oh, is he talking about me?" No, but I think these help you as we start out. There was a lady that was married, and her pastor would notice when she would return from a visit from her parents' home, she would just be in fits of deep depression. So she described her problem to her pastor. The pastor would ask if she noticed that every time she went home for a visit, she came back extremely depressed. And she said, "That's ridiculous. I don't live there anymore. How could that trip affect me this way?" And then this lady who is now, she's married, she has children, but she would go home. And then she said, "I think it is that I start feeling guilty." And she would recount the remarks that her parents would make when she would come home, and because she lived farther away, and they would talk of how wonderful it was for grandparents to have a hands-on role in raising the children. And they would talk of the community activities and all the friends that she grew up with that didn't move away, and how wonderful it would be if she could be involved in those activities. And the list went on and on and on. And so the pastor said, "Well, so what do you think is happening?" And she said, "Yeah, then I come back and I feel guilty." And she goes, "What are you feeling guilty for? You married, you moved away, and you're actually coming for a visit. That's actually okay to do a visit, but your parents are treating you wrong." All right, so that's one scenario there. Another one I read of, this was actually a pastor that grew up in a very abusive home. His parents were very abusive, wrongfully. They weren't saved, and they were abusive. And so he got saved later in life. And this was him recounting it. He said many times, "I chose to limit my time with my abusive relatives rather than cut off all contact." And he said, "I even decided to take a sabbatical of several months from my relatives to see if it would help me in reconciling some of the relationships down the road. And I would be able to even get a fresh perspective." And he said even, especially, he was talking about it as far as a pastor that was in an abusive situation. He says people that are in an abusive situation, the people that abused their power almost have power over top of especially children that grow up in that situation. And he said by pulling away, he said you are protecting yourself, and then you start understanding some of the pull that they have. And it's a wrong pull that they have. It's not a godly way of treating them. And he said, I still love my parents. I didn't break off all contact, but I curtailed all my relationship because I felt it was necessary. He said, but at that point, my mother saved me the trouble of breaking off our relationship and stopped speaking to me instead. He said they, and then he even says one word of warning. Don't be surprised if you do this, because this happened to me. If your relatives then tell lies to others about what happened, and they tell the whole rest of the family that you stopped speaking to her. He said, that's what my mom did. So that's an example. All right, so here's one example of a lady that got married. She's having a family, and then all of a sudden she's put on a guilt trip. Here's another man that grew up in an abusive situation. He's a pastor. His parents aren't saved, but he'd like to have a relationship. But they kind of ruin it, and then they lie to everybody else about it. Another example so each situation is a little bit differently. Sometimes you have a sibling difficulty. Learned of or read of one that a couple siblings grew up together. They went to the same church. They went to the same school. But then they get older. They go separate ways. And as they become more distinct in their growth in the Lord, the other person that kind of went their own way, as they grow older, both of them growing separate, they realize they don't like the same things. They don't live the same ways. They have different dress standards. They have different music standards. They have different churches that they attend. They even have, when it comes to alcohol and language, different things. So you have some of these things that come into play. So does the Bible say anything about it? Well, there is some illustrations in the Bible that I think can help us, and we'll go through a number of them. It will not touch everything, but I hope and pray that it'll help us. So let's turn to Genesis chapter 13. So our first example is the story of Abraham and Lot. So what is that relationship? It's an uncle and a nephew. It's an uncle and a nephew. So it is relationships here. So Genesis chapter 13, look at verse 7. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abraham's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle. And the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled then in the land. And Abraham said unto Lot, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before me? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou wilt depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. Lot lifted up his eyes, and we know, we have the advantage of knowing, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. And we know that Lot had a bad heart. He had a tent towards worldliness, literally a tent towards worldliness. He had a leaning towards the wrong things. But Abraham didn't know that. He just knew that there was strife going on. Verse 11, then Lot chose him all the plains of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east. Notice the phrase, and they separated themselves the one from the other. So here we have Abraham and Lot starting out, and they separate. This is a point that can come out to us in a family situation. Right here, this teaches us something. Strife over materialistic items sometimes can be a great indicator of deeper spiritual problems. All right, I was talking with somebody today, a staff member, and they said, oh, I've seen that a lot. You need to understand it. When strife starts coming in within family over materialistic things, normally it's a deeper spiritual problem. Right here, you start seeing it. And it wasn't Abraham. Abraham stepped away, and as I read this, and as I have studied the life of Abraham, I don't think Abraham necessarily was out in the fields. I think he came on the scene and saw a whole bunch of strife, and it grieved him. And it should grieve you. Shouldn't be all kinds of strife all the time. So it grieved him. He knew he had to, let's resolve this. So you see that right away in this. So what can you do? What does Abraham show you to do? Lead in the situation. Lead in it. Take initiative. All right, there's strife going on. Let's figure this out. And don't be greedy about it. Do you notice that with Abraham? I noticed that Abraham has a very gracious spirit, and you'll see later on, if you know the life of Abraham, God rewarded Abraham because he had a right heart. Don't be greedy. Like, you're just trying to take advantage. All right, that spirit right there says you're wrong. And if you're dealing with a relative and every time it's money, 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 guaranteed there's a deep spiritual problem. And you're seeing it because there was a deep spiritual problem. And so be bigger than it. Lead in the situation. If possible, have the other person help you draw up some things. Did he allow that? Because what may happen if you're sitting there and you're like, hey, you know what? I'm taking this and I'm gonna take that. More than likely, that's gonna come back on you. It never came back on Abraham. He must have done something right. So you learn from it. So here we have an Abraham. Strife over materialistic items, I think, sometimes can be a great indicator of deeper spiritual problems. Lead in the situation, and if possible, have the other person help you. Then it's not going to come back on you. You see then Genesis 14. Look at Genesis 14 and verse 12. And they took Lot, Abraham's brother's son, so that's why I say it's nephew. We're not going to use that illustration again. It's not close to that, okay? But they took Lot, Abraham's brother's son, so this is his nephew, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. There came one that escaped and told Abraham. So what do we see about this? Abraham obviously was aware of what was going on. So was it a complete cutoff? No. They went their separate ways, but somehow Abraham knew what was going on in Lot's life, because when a bad thing happened, the servant in Lot's house, immediately, what did he think? I've got to get to Abraham. It's good for you and I to remember that. I believe that Abraham all through this was a godly man. You want to keep a godly contact, if you can, with that relative. But it's godly. I'm not going to the bar with them. I'm not hanging out all the time, but they know. What do they know? Hey, every once in a while, maybe send them a card with a Bible verse. Hey, I'm praying for you. If they don't like it, burn it. But they know they have somebody that's in touch with God. And Lot's servant knew something bad happened. There's one guy I want to get to. That's Abraham. It's Abraham. And what you're seeing is right here in the Bible. And you see that, what did Abraham do? He separated, but there was enough respect for Abraham when something bad happened. He wanted to get to Lot. And what did Abraham do? You made your bed, buddy. Sleep in it. I don't see that even in the Hebrew. All right, and Pastor Armerkost, Dr. Mitchell, some of these other guys in Hebrew, they may be able to find it, but I don't think it's in there. What you see is that he suited up, got his guys together, and he went to war for a nephew that was an idiot. All right. So then we come down to verse 17. The king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer, and the kings that were with him at the valley of Shaveh, which is the king's dale, and Melchizedek, king of Salem, he blessed him. Look at verse 21. And the king of Sodom said unto Abraham, give me the persons, and take the goods to thyself. Notice verse 22. And Abraham said unto the king of Sodom, I have lift up my hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread even to a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich. You know what you notice about Abraham? He's a man of principle. Even in this, he goes out, sacrifices, I'm sure, a lot of energy, time, possessions, rescues Lot. They want to reward him, and he walks away from it. He doesn't want to be beholding to anything with the world. That's what you see here. You know what? No. You don't have to give me anything. God takes care of me. You need to be careful of that. So what's a lesson for you and I? You better be careful with worldly relatives. I mean, they're going to give us $500 for Christmas. Are they that heathen? Yeah. So what are you telling them? Oh, well, you poor mouth all the time about God. You don't see that with Abraham. You see, yeah, well, he was rich. I know he was, and that's why we respect him. But he was a man of principle. And you saw he chose. He said, Lot, choose whatever. And he chose whatever, and he chose the world. Abraham did what was right. He didn't choose the world. He let Lot take it. But he also had principles in his life. I'm not gonna, you know what? The world's not gonna own me. They're not gonna own me, and they shouldn't own you. All right, and you see that in the passage here. Abraham was obviously aware of the situation, but you see that he had some principles here. Then notice in Genesis chapter 18, another passage, Genesis chapter 18. Genesis 18, and Abraham is interceding for Sodom. Look at verse 23. And Abraham drew near and said, Wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Peradventure there be 50. And we know the passage. He goes all the way down to verse 32, and he said, Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak yet but this once. Peradventure 10 shall be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for 10's sake. It's pretty obvious that Abraham prayed a lot for Lot. He prayed much for Lot. And so should you. You have a relative that's unsaved. You have a parent. You have a wayward child. You should be begging God for 10. Wouldn't you spare? 50, wouldn't you spare? Now, I think it shocked Abraham, because Abraham obviously thought maybe a little more of Lot. So that also shows me that he was not very closely associated with Lot. Why do I see that? Because he thought for sure Lot would have shared the gospel with 50 people. Right? Didn't he say, hey, God, 50? There's not 50. So obviously there's not really close contact with Lot, because he thinks that he at least would have 50 people around him that would love the Lord. And he doesn't. But he still is begging for mercy. God, just have mercy. Just have mercy. Just have mercy. So it's pretty obvious that Abraham prayed much for Lot. He never lost his burden for his nephew. But you don't see him doing many visits. It seems to indicate that Abraham is pretty unaware of the city of Sodom and the wickedness of it. It seems to indicate it to me, because God comes and says, hey, I'm going to destroy Sodom. You're kidding? You're destroying Sodom? Because I don't think he's vacationing there. I don't think he's hanging out at Lot's house. Because otherwise, I think, remember when the two angels came to Lot's house? What did they do? All right? They were pretty wicked. It's pretty disgusting thinking about it. I'm pretty sure with Abraham and his little warrior band, the little, all right, excuse my terminology, but the little queers hanging out, they'd have been sliced and diced. All right? Yep, kill them. All right? Get off me. All right? Get away from me. You know what? You come through the door. All right, I got 2 double-barrel swords ready to stab you. All right, and they're coming right through you. Okay, it's just, you see that Abraham has I think he kept his distance because he's kind of shocked that Sodom's getting destroyed. I don't think he's hanging out there for vacation. It's another lesson for you and I. Like, hey, yeah, oh, you know what? I'm just going over there for a week or two. Really? To Sodom? Hanging out? No, you pray for him. Hey, you need something? I'm there. I'm going to help you. But I'm keeping my distance. Why? Because I have principles. That's what you see with Abraham, Uncle Abraham, and Lot. So let's look at another example. All right, we are not going to get through all the examples, so I'll throw some out to you and let you think about them. All right, and then your own study, because I've been thinking about this. We split it up many months ago, so I've been thinking about this for a while. So I started saying, all right, does the Bible have things to say about family relation and how we should act? I think it does. Okay, so here you see Abraham and Lot. Another example is Genesis 27. I call this the Isaac home scandal. And what do I mean by that? This teaches you that this home was just flat out dysfunctional. All right, you got Isaac and Rebekah, and then you have Jacob and Esau, and between the four of them, oh my word, it's unbelievable. This is what Isaac and Rebekah both had favoritism towards different sons. Isaac loved Esau more than Jacob. Rebekah loved Jacob more than Esau. Both Isaac and Rebekah made bad decisions because of favoritism. Rebekah eavesdropped and was sneaking it. I mean, I don't know, that was before the spying gear and all that type of stuff, but she's listening in to conversations that are between Isaac and Esau. And what is she doing? She's trying to manipulate in the home to get something that supposedly is God's will. Oh, it's the Lord's will. And you're cheating and lying. All right, it's a bad situation. And this is what I think one of the takeaways you get from this story. Nobody called sin in this home. And that's what I find with a lot of family problems. They're like, oh, yeah, no. Hey, you know what? You're lying. Hey, you're deceiving. Hey, you're being... you're not even being faithful to your husband, and you're not being faithful to your wife, and you're not being fair with the children, and nobody says anything. Like, no. Call sin. That's what we need to do in houses. All right, this house is a dysfunctional house. If you want to have that type of house, that's fine. But call sin. We don't allow it. So that's a quick one there. Let's go to then 1 Samuel chapter 13. 1 Samuel chapter 13. So that's kind of within a family. You have siblings, you have mom and dads. That's the as I call it, the Isaac home scandal. Then in 1 Samuel 13, verse 3, and Jonathan smote the garrison of the Philistine that was in Geba, and the Philistines heard of it, and Saul blew the trumpet throughout all the land, saying, let the Hebrews hear. You'll see through this that Jonathan, most believe he was probably upper or early 20s at this stage in his life, but he's an animal. Jonathan is an animal. I would be really happy to have Jonathan as a son. I mean, he's an all-out animal. I mean, killing people, but the right way, legal killings. I mean, he's just an animal. All right, and then... So you see this about Jonathan, and then you go to chapter 14 and verse 1. Now it came to pass upon a day that Jonathan, the son of Saul, said unto the young man that bare his armor, come, let us go over to the Philistines' garrison that is on the other side. But he told not his father. Saul tarried in the uttermost part of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree, being lazy, and he was a slug, he was a coward, that's in the Hebrew, and he had a migraine. Oh, did you see that? Which is in migraine. And the people that were with him were about 600 men. And you see in this passage, you go down later, look at verse 13. And Jonathan climbed up upon his hands and upon his feet, and his armor bearer after him. And they fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer slew after him. All right, so here's Jonathan. He's an animal. All right, and then you go down to verse 24. The men of Israel were distressed that day, for Saul had adjured the people, saying, "Cursed be the man that eateth any food until evening." Verse 27, but Jonathan heard not when his father charged the people with the oath. Wherefore he put forth the end of the rod that was in his hand, dipped it in a honeycomb, and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes were enlightened. Like, duh, why? Because his dumb dad made a rule that while you're fighting, you can't eat. Hello. Yeah, you're a dork. Okay? So, Jonathan didn't know about it, but he goes and eats, and King Dork, what does he do? Here's Jonathan, mighty man of valor, and he wants to kill his son because he dipped his little pinky in a honeycomb. And he was the man, and everybody else is like, I can't fight. All right? And Jonathan, and then the men finally rally around, and Jonathan's like, you know what? That's a stupid rule. All right? And Jonathan is not a little boy here. He's an animal that is, he's a warrior. And so King Saul made a dumb move. He didn't know about it, but you're going to kill him over it? And so, all right, gladly, God stopped that. So you see some kind of friction there. Look at then 1 Samuel 19 and verse 1. And Saul spake to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. All right, here's King Dork again. And you'll notice in chapter 20 and verse 30. So this is transpiring. Look at verse 30. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said unto him, "Thou son of the perverse, rebellious woman." Actually, this is your son. All right, I don't know, you might not have had a biology class, but that's actually your son. "Do not I know that thou hast chosen the son of Jesse to thine own confusion, and unto confusion thy mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse liveth upon the ground, thou shalt not be established nor thy kingdom." He's a selfish man. Jonathan answered Saul his father and said unto him, "Wherefore shall he be slain? What hath he done?" Saul cast a javelin at him to smite him. So Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger. I don't think it was wrong either. All right, so, in one of them we see an uncle and a nephew. One we saw just a whole bunch of mess within a family. There was moms and dad and children. Here you see a dad and a son. Like, you know what? And it's touted, honor thy father and thy mother. He's, probably 28 years old. He's killed a lot more people than the king has ever killed. He is not a little tiny child. And King Saul is stupid. And that's what we've got to understand. Treat your son like a man. If he's a man. Treat him like, he's out of the house, he's a man. You want a little boy? Then, you know what? And that's what a lot of our society doesn't understand manhood today. They do not understand manhood. We want to raise our boys to become men, and at some point, we deal with them as men to men. Man to man. And I'm not saying, but what does it mean to honor thy father and thy mother? Does that mean obey? Well, then you're stupid. All right, your son is out of your house, and you're saying honor your father. You don't know your Bible. It does not mean obey. Honor your father and mother means this: honor God. That's what it means. You honor him and you honor your father and mother. So they go away from God. I'm sorry, my honor is honoring God. I am going to do what's right to them. And what is that? I am going to lead them to Christ. That's what I'm going to do. That's honoring them. Why? Because without Christ, they die and go to hell. That's what happened. So everything is an apportion to Christ. And there are some times, and this is what I'm this way. All right, it's not taking responsibility as a pastor. I can make mistakes, and so somebody comes up and says, "Hey, you said, oh, you know what? You said this and this. You don't mess with my sermon." They're like, "Well, you're English." I'm like, "Oh, you don't touch that. My words are inspired. That's almost the way you're acting. I'm sorry, my words are not inspired. God's word is. You know what? Sometimes, I can mess up the king's English. But you don't have a king, so I don't even know what that means. All right? I can mess up English. I can have a dangling modifier. You don't touch my modifiers. But that's the way some of us act. We act like our words are inspired. I'm not giving up any respect by saying, hey, yeah, you're right. I'll try to work on that. Whoa. Well, the other side is that I'm saying I'm perfect. Well, at some point, your son is going to figure out you're not. And then what's going to happen to him? Oh, my word, my whole life. Now, Dad's not perfect. There's no Easter bunny, and there's no Santa Claus. I'm shot. Okay? You're all done. But I'm not saying that you sit there and argue. All right, so if you're the teenagers aren't here. In fact, all along, I told them I was going to joke with you. I was going to, for the first one, Dr. Vogelin's Pastor Parrish was teaching the teens the same exact thing. And then last week, Pastor Ummerkoff, Pastor Parrish, because I wanted the teens to do that, and I caught Pastor Parrish and said, you know what, you are not teaching this. And I said, but you know what, maybe it would be good. We'll tell the teens that they have a right to argue with the parents all the time. You know what, you're wrong. All right. No. I'm not saying, they're teens, they're in your house. No, you're obeying. You're paying for this and you're paying for that. There's that submission there. And I'm not saying, at some point though, Jonathan, and you can see it, read the passages here, you'll see Jonathan wasn't a little boy. He was a man. So treat him as a man, King Saul. You made some dumb moves. And you're trying to kill the Lord's anointed? I'm sorry, I ain't having any part. And you notice his vernacular, it's pretty bad. So we see that situation. So let me give you just another one, and then I want to read a passage in the Gospels, a couple of them. All right, let me give you another one or two other ones in the Old Testament you write down. 2 Samuel 13, 1 and 2. This is dealing with cousins. Oh, dealing with cousins. You say, all right, guess what the cousins is? It's a famous Buddy Had a Friend. They were two cousins. Hey, cuz. All right, you know what you learned from that one? You better watch having your kids hang out with your cousins by themselves. That's actually, Buddy Had a Friend. There's actually a legitimate thought there. Be careful with the cuz. You better know what's going on. Okay? So that's Jonathan. And again, I have Bible, so you can feel free to come up with your own, philosophical with like Aristotle, Plato, or whatever. But I prefer using the Bible for my theology. So that's 2 Samuel 13, 1 and 2. The other one is that's 2 Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 22, and 1 Samuel chapter 3 and verse 11. That is Eli and his sons. And you will notice that Eli and his sons, they're a little older, but God also puts it on Eli because he was in a position of authority, that he did not stop his two sons from behaving wrong in the temple. And he said, you did not restrain them. And he held Eli accountable for it. Okay? So in Eli's case, God wasn't really, he was punishing him some for the being dad. But in the case of the priesthood, his sons were in the priesthood. So there's an authority from the main guy and the guy underneath. And that teaches us a lesson there too. And that is, hey, when we have authority and we see something wrong, you say something about it. Because God held Eli responsible for not saying something about it. It's again saying something about it. So then we go to the New Testament, and Christ has some teaching for us. I'm going to give you a couple of passages. Matthew chapter 10 and verse 34 to 50. Matthew chapter 10, 34 to 50. Matthew chapter 12, 46 through 50. You have John chapter 2 towards the end of the chapter. That's with the wedding in Cana. You also have John 19 at the foot of the cross. These are all instances when Jesus had dealings with family. So the passage in Matthew chapter 10, and a lot of people have taken this and twisted it way out of context. So it says, "For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's foe shall be they of his own household." And then it says, "He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me." So, and that's one of the qualifying statements there that helps you understand the passage. It's more than me. And this is what you have to put in your heart. What Christ is telling us is that he is supreme. It's one of the principles. It doesn't change with family. It doesn't change with family. You say, "Oh, well, that's my brother or sister." What does the Bible say? So there's a couple of tips that I think we can come away with that help us with family and boundaries. What are some? Make some boundaries and make them clear. And I think you should think through these boundaries every year or so, especially as your life changes. You have younger children, you and your wife need to think about boundaries. What boundaries are you going to have within family? And it needs to be clearly defined, and you talk about it. That helps. Understanding, as I gave some examples, sometimes, especially with unsaved family, they're going to get mad and they're going to twist it against you. That's all right. But be like Abraham. You don't see Abraham doing social media blogs against Lot. You don't know what he did. You know what? I'm telling you, and some of you, you may do this. Your social media, you're a child. You act like a child. Remember, that's over the whole world. My challenge to you, if you don't understand it, watch Zuckerberg's interview before the Senate. What you will understand is that everything you do, Dr. Vogelin and I were talking about it last week or the beginning of this week, and it was like some of the senators are a bunch of idiots. And he kept repeating himself over and over, and he's like, "Hello, this is the internet. When you write something, it's there for everybody to see, and everybody is going to have this information, and we sell it." Duh. That's that little thing that you signed, and you had no idea when you signed up for it. Yes, you gave them the right to invade every part of your life. And you're like, no. Oh, no. And then you say whatever. You can't take that back. You see Abraham, that he lives above it. He's a godly man. He's still praying for his nephew, but there's a distance. He's making boundaries. He's making them clear. He's thinking it through every so often, and that's what I would recommend. Then, another takeaway from these stories, watch the influence, especially with young children and teenagers. You will never get that back. You will never get that influence back. And so you just say, "Oh, you know what? I'll just have my kids sleep over there." Now, I'm sorry, not without me. I'm right there. Ain't going to happen. "Oh, you know what? They're nice people." Are they unsaved? So does the Bible have a principle about that? Oh, that's family. Does the Bible have a principle? Who's first? "Be ye not unequally yoked with unbelievers." I'm not going out to eat with them without me there then. Because my young, impressionable children, they're not going out to eat with an unsaved person by themselves. They're talking about movies, talking about the ungodly music. "Oh, but it's family." And then what is my purpose? I'm going to be nice to them, but my whole purpose of getting with them is to point them to Christ. So if I'm sitting around at some point, probably God's going to come up. And if not, then you're a coward. That's what you are. You're a coward. Because you're not a good Christian. Because who's first? They are. Because they made you shut your mouth about God. The Bible says if you're ashamed of him, maybe he's ashamed of you. You see, there's Bible principle. We don't chuck the Bible because it's family. We don't chuck it. In fact, Jesus said that. Who is my family? Didn't Jesus say that? That's Matthew 12. He says, remember his mother and brother, and they're sitting out there, and he says, wait a minute. You know who my family is? They that do the will of my Father. You see, it's nice when you have Bible, because it kind of helps you understand different things. So I make boundaries. I make them clear. I think through these things. I watch the influence, especially with young children and teens. I don't put my head in the sand. Okay, I'm not going to put my head in the sand. Oh, I don't know. I don't know what's going on. Yeah, you do. Look up on Facebook. Parents, you got a wayward kid? Look up their Facebook account. You're like, oh, I think they're loving the Lord. All right, well then look up their thing, and you can't even look at their picture, because they're in their little skinny bikini. You can't. Oh, but they love the Lord. No, they don't. They're conning you because you got your head in the sand. Look it up. Be like, oh, I don't want to. Do you want to pray for them properly? Do you want to have wisdom in your decisions? Then know a little bit. Then biblical principles will guide you with talk. So let me give you an example. Let's say that somebody, it's a relative, and they used to be here and they went away, and then you come there and you start talking about Christ. Now, you know what? I know about so-and-so. What's the Bible principle? Are they there? Then shut up. Say, you know what? If you want, I'll get them and we can talk about it. But you have no authority to talk to somebody else about somebody else in our church. Otherwise, you're a gossip. You are. And that's Bible. You say, family. No. What's the Bible say? So somebody else is talking about somebody else in our church, and you say, I'm going to help. No, you're not. You're a gossip. That's Bible, actually. And you have nothing to back you up except going against the Bible. So the biblical principles will guide me with church discussions. It guides me with past problems. It guides me on what to do and how to talk. I don't have to compromise. I still can meet with them. And one of the fruits of the Spirit is goodness. Goodness means this: gentle but firm. I'm not compromising. I'm not going to yell. I can't. All right? No, I'm sorry. I don't believe I'm doing that, but I'll pray for you. I care about you. I really love you. I'd love for you to come to church with me. You know, would you like me to come by and we can pray together sometime? It's always that. Why? Because God is preeminent. He's my focus. And if I do that, then all these other things that kind of get muddy, they clear up a little bit. And all of us, you know, we all have family, and we'll all have family that has kind of weird dynamics in it. But you see in the Bible, are there families that have some weird dynamics? Yeah. I am just, I don't know. I mean, my wife might have been sneaking over she did once, actually. She snuck in and eavesdropped on one of my conversations. But I'll let her confess that someday to you. All right? But I'm glad that we're not sneaking around and I'm bugging her purse. Like, hey, what is she saying to the kids about me? I don't know about that. I'm going to be gone this week and I'm going to check. And that's a crazy house with Isaac and Rebekah. So you see, there's some bad situations in the Bible. But don't let family change the Bible. Don't let it change the Bible. What is our priority is God. God first. And then he'll help us out with that. Okay.